Hi everyone. I'll just give it a minute or two, wait for everyone to join. It takes some time. Okay, so hello and welcome to the second session of the Ways of Repair, Loss and Damage Symposium. My name is Phoebe Lynn Elnan, and I'm one of the coordinators of Ways of Repair, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's session, which will see award-winning writer and poet Alexis Pauline Gumbs presenting the text Tell the Others, which has been written for the Ways of Repair, Loss and Damage Texts of Repair Commission. Thank you so much for joining us all today. To those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Ways of Repair, Loss and Damage program includes an artistic research residency, a set of commissioned critical texts, a series of public events such as the symposium, all of which are aimed at facilitating a transdisciplinary exchange around the issue of loss and damage caused by the climate crisis. This program is part of the Loss and Damage Collaborations Art and Culture program and has been generously supported by the Open Society Foundations. Before we get going, I'd like to introduce some house rules. Today's session we'll have a sort of ceremony with Alexis, who will guide us through her text in the way that only she knows best. If anyone has any questions or wants to participate, because it'll be interactive, you're very welcome to do so in the chat. If you want to introduce yourselves in the chat also, let us know where you're tuning in from, and remember to click on everyone, to everyone, in order to address everyone instead. If not, you're just talking to us, the hosts and the panelists. However, please note that you will be ejected from the session for any abusive comments. If you have any specific questions, you could post them in the Q&A box, but this session will be a bit more interactive, so I'll let Alexis lead the way on that. And also note that the session will be recorded, and the recording will be shared on the symposium website very soon, within 24 hours of this session. So the Ways of Repair, Loss and Damage online symposium is the culmination of the work of the artists in residence and critical thinkers to date, and will take place over 9 sessions between the 20th and 29th of January 2025. This week, we'll see Zara Malkani, Nambuso Matibela Sibunelo Gomede, and Gabriela De Matos present their artistic research that they have undertaken as part of the year-long Ways of Repair, Loss and Damage Artist Research Residency, alongside presentations from Alexis today, TJ Demos presented yesterday, and Fahana Sultana, who will present tomorrow. They will all be introducing their texts of repair developed throughout 2024. Next week, we'll see themed panel discussions, during which the artists in residence, commissioned critical thinkers, and other experts will explore the critical links between loss and damage discourse and the themes already being widely explored between the arts and humanities in response to the combined climate, human rights, and environmental crisis, and the drive towards decolonization. So if you haven't already signed up for any of those, you could find the registration links for each session on the webpage that's being shared in the chat now. We also encourage you to visit the website to explore the digital restitutions by the artist in residence, which are also being pasted into the chat now. So in today's session, we have with us Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who will be presenting the text Tell the Others. In this text, Alexis was guided by the last works of the poet and environmentalist Audre Lorde to create a written ceremony in the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl, one that meets us at the shoreline of loss in the face of a multi-life form convergence of disaster, with questions, offerings, and provocations that support us in finding a collective way forward in the details of our survival. The full text, which was released today, can be found on our website, where it can also be downloaded as a PDF, and the link will shortly be shared in the chat. And now allow me to introduce Alexis, who is queer, Black troublemaker, Black feminist love evangelist, and an aspirational cousin to all sentient beings. Her work in this lifetime is to facilitate infinite, unstoppable ancestral love in practice. Her poetic work is in response to the needs of her cherished communities, has held space for multitudes in mourning and movement. Alexis is the author of Survival is a Promise, The Eternal Life of Audre Lorde, Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals, Dub, Finding Ceremony, M-Archive, After the End of the World, and Spill, Scenes of Black Feminist Fugitivity. Alexis is also the co-editor of Revolutionary Mothering, Love on the Front Lines. And I'll now give the floor to you, Alexis. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so incredibly grateful to have you with us here today.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. Thank you so much to Teo, for the whole team, for the love work of Ways of Repair. It's so needed. It's so needed. So really, really honored to be with you all. Thank you everyone for coming. I think it's almost 100 of us now, and folks are still coming in. But I want to just start grounding us in our breath. Such a sacred possibility to breathe. I am going to take 9 breaths. I'm going to mark my inhale and my exhale. You can join me. You can use me saying inhaling, exhaling as a prompt for your own breathing, or you can just breathe at your own pace and just notice your next 9 breaths. You can hear me, right? Okay, great. Here we go. And just, get more comfortable. You may not be virtually inside of a sea grape tree, which is a great place to be, but be as comfortable as you can be wherever you are. Here we go. Inhaling and exhaling. 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 One more time. Deep inhale. And maybe a loud exhale. mm. To be breathing. I'm grateful to everything that has supported your breathing, including the trees. And so another way that I would like to invite us to be in space together today is through the practice of dedication. Of course, you already heard from Phoebe that my practice in this work is dedicated to our ancestor, Audre Lorde. But this dedication practice allows us to be even more expansive with our idea of who we are connected to that we want to bring energetically into this process. And so the text I'm sharing is a written ceremony. Some of you all, I see you already in the chat, you understand. This is how we always do. And for some of you all, it might be your first time participating in the ceremony via Zoom. So this is part of the way we make it sacred, is we dedicate to people that we love. So I'm dedicating my participation today, in addition to Audre Lorde, to my Nana, Joyce McKenzie. She, like the sea grape, has wide roots, and she is a Jamaican migrant. She was a Windrush migrant. She migrated to the United States without papers. She is 90 years old, and she is very possibly on the phone right now talking to someone else in the diaspora about something that's going on. And so I think of her in very sea grape ways. And she also embodies the tell the others because she will tell. She will tell. She is a news network in and of herself. So I'm dedicating to my Nana, Joyce McKenzie. You can dedicate to anyone. The rigor of this form of dedication is to be specific. So even if you're going to dedicate to multiple beings, we want you to name them specifically. They could be ancestors, people who have lived before. They could be people living now. My Nana is living now, resplendent and gorgeous at 90 years old. They could be people who are older than you, like my Nana is my elder. They could be people younger than you. They could be people of any species. The sea grape people, particular sea grape tree that is um, on Rendezvous Bay in Anguilla is a special kindred of mine. So yeah, we're going to just take a moment in the chat to offer these dedications. So thank you everyone who already offered who you are, where you're coming in from. Yes, Lisanne is hailing from St. Martin and Saba, so you know what I mean about the sea grape. But yes, so feel free to share. I'm going to maybe mute myself because I'm going to probably make a lot of noises of celebration of your dedications, but we're just going to take this time. So if you don't have the chat open the chat, look at who folks are dedicating to, add your own dedication. This is one of the ways we celebrate our interconnection. Go. Oh, and just a reminder, like Phoebe said, be sure to change your chat function to everyone so everyone can see. I'm seeing all of them and they're amazing. But just make sure that it's not just the hosts and panelists who are getting to see your dedication. Everyone should be able to affirm your dedication. This is so beautiful. Feel free to keep them coming in. I just want to name how much acknowledgement of interconnection, of love in the face of loss, of continued connections across the boundaries of life and death and migration and space and time you are already demonstrating here. I mean, for me, you know, you could read the text online, this part where we actually make our own web and honor our interconnected rhizomatic root structures is so priceless. So thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing these dedications. Thank you for living the life that you live, which honors generations beyond your own. It honors context beyond the context that you're living in. And also just to say, I'm very happy to see Caribbean massive, so many people from the Caribbean here in the chat. And um, that's a beautiful thing, especially today. So as this continues, I want to just explain, and this whole thing is a meditation, but I want to just explain the reason that I asked for this sea grape image to be here with us the whole time. The sea grape is a teacher species for me. I'm really trying to learn from how sea grapes are. And so for those folks who there might be different shoreline species where you live, the sea grape often is found at the shoreline. The sea grape is very resilient to salt and to water and also to wind because the sea grape roots spread wide and the new sea grapes sprout up like horizontally from these different roots. And the sea grape is such a profound embrace of the shoreline in beauty and in its own process of being. It also just produces these profoundly vitamin C rich grapes and these incredible solar panel leaves. And yeah, I'm grateful for the sea grape. And I'm also aspirationally trying to be more like the sea grape. Sometimes it's really important for me to remember that the wisdom about how we repair, the wisdom about how we regenerate, the wisdom about rootedness and accountability does not live in the human species. It lives in the interrelationship. And so gratitude to the sea grapes, gratitude to the mangroves, gratitude to the shoreline plants of your experience, gratitude to the shoreline people. Okay. So tell the others this text that I was so honored to create as part of this Ways of Repair collaboration as a text of repair. It is a written ceremony and it draws on a poem called Zakitan Ke Parle Lot by Audre Lorde. And I'm going to actually read the whole poem. The text starts with a little epigraph from it and it references it throughout, but I'm going to read the whole poem. And this is a poem. Zakitan Ke Parle Lot is in the Carriacou Creole, and it means you who hear tell the others, which is why the piece is called Tell the Others. Audre Lorde wrote it not in the aftermath of a hurricane, and I will be talking about hurricane and climate catastrophe in this text. She wrote it in the aftermath of the US invasion of Grenada. And this is a really important context. And when you hear the poem, you'll hear it, that it's a challenge to empire. And I want to read the whole poem also to connect to yesterday's incredible presentation by T.J. Demos, who's another one of the people generating a text of repair. He was talking about how important it is when we talk about climate change, when we talk about repair and accountability, to not make it abstract, but to really think about perpetrators, to think about war as an injury against the climate. And very specifically, he spoke about Israel's occupation of Palestine and the profound loss, but also the reproduction of methods of extraction and environmental destruction that really is modeled in that form of violence, even as we're at the moment of a tenuous ceasefire. So reading this poem, I want to also connect to the earlier session. And if you didn't get a chance to experience that session, it's wonderful that it's recorded and that the recording link is there in the chat. Okay, so this is Zakitan Ke Parle Lot by Audre Lorde. And she notes here that it's called In the Streets of Carriacou Before a Funeral or Burial. Oh, Zakitan Ke Parle Lot, you who hear, tell the others. There is no metaphor for blood flowing from children. These are your deaths or your judgments. Zakitan Ke Parle Lot, you who hear, tell the others. This is not some other city's trial. Your locks are no protection. Hate chips at your front door like flint. Flames creep beneath them. My children are resting in question, and your tomorrows flicker, a face without eyes, without future. Zakitan Ke Parle Lot, whose visions lie dead in the alleys, dreams bagged like old leaves, anger shorn of promise. You are drowning in my children's blood without metaphor. Oh, you who hear, tell the others. Zakitan Ke Parle Lot. Maybe another deep breath. And so this interconnected accountability, this importance of Audre Lorde saying, this is not some other city's trial, is really important when we think about what's happening all over the world and how it impacts all of us. This is a call for accountability that Audre Lorde is making as a US citizen in protest of the United States imperialism in general, but specifically invasion of Grenada, the first Black English-speaking socialist republic in the Western Hemisphere. All right, so thus saith the Lord. We're going to continue with this text, which, as you'll see in the links, you can find it already now on the Ways of Repair website for loss and damage, and the link is earlier in the chat if you want to read along. But also, I'm a very engaging speaker, and you could also just look at me or close your eyes and listen. I'm so glad you're here. Overnight, on June 30th to July 1st, 2024, the winds came, like they always do, from the shores of West Africa across the Atlantic Ocean to the Caribbean volcanic arc, and reclaimed the houses, shops, crops, and broader vegetation of the island of Carriacou. This collection of recycled trade winds gathered up into a Category 4 hurricane meteorologists named Beryl. Beryl is a common early 20th century name in the Caribbean, and therefore in my own Caribbean family. My great aunt Beryl, who everyone called B, was a midwife. She was the one who fed my grandmother, that Nana who I dedicated to. She's the one who fed my Nana custard and coached her through the birth of her first child. Hurricane Beryl was not as gentle or considerate as Great Aunt B. She was more like birth itself, a phenomenon that comes in its own time and rips open a pre-existing structure, a potentially deadly process that offers the possibility of a new life. Before Hurricane Beryl, there is no record of a Category 4 hurricane ever developing in the Atlantic Ocean in June, right at the beginning of hurricane season. Beryl's record setting is explained by the fact that the waters of the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea are hotter than they have ever been, which increases the velocity of the wind as the cold and heat between the ocean and the clouds chase each other more and more intensely. And and the water is hotter than it has ever been before because carbon pollution, mostly from industrialized nations outside the Caribbean, has changed the atmosphere of planet Earth. There are no factories anywhere on the island of Carriacou. There are very few cars. Most people use 15-passenger commuter vans or walk to get around the island. And yet, because of the accumulated, deregulated carbon emissions of the United States and other nations of the global north, Hurricane Beryl changed the definition of an early hurricane and destroyed nearly every home, business, grove of trees, and piece of public infrastructure on the island of Carriacou. Zakitan ke parle la is a Creole phrase from Carriacou. It means, you who hear, tell the others. And traditionally, people call it out in the streets before a funeral or a burial to let the community know to grieve, to honor the dead, and to prepare for the big drum ceremony. In Carriacou, after a community member dies, a big drum ceremony is held to mark their passing, to signal the continuity of ancestral connection across the bridges of life and death. The big drum ceremony also happens when someone builds a home to ground the building in an ancestral context. There is a feast with food offerings to the ancestors on the old parents' plate. And community members eat and dance with the ancestors to drum rhythms that signal a larger death, a more collective afterlife. The rhythms and songs called Kromanti, Congo, Temne, Juba, Arada, and more remind the people of Carriacou that they know who they are. People get up and dance when the drummers play the specific rhythms that represent the West African nations of their lineage. That is the big drum. The big drum. A sound loud enough to rebuild. Not homes, but the sense of home. Not washed out roadways, but paths of lineage. A vibration that cannot raise the dead to speak, but can renew our pact to listen to the ancestors whose names we may never know. The death-dealing transatlantic kidnapping enterprise, through which, as historian Taya Miles describes it, colonial corporations, quote, feasted on the flesh, end quote, of African people, depended on the same trade winds that fuel every hurricane that has ever reached the Caribbean islands. Chattel slavery, the shorter name for that process that seeks to turn people into property or into pure disposable production, also depends on destroying infrastructure. It is impossible to enslave people because people are inherently free. And so to perpetuate slavery, an enslaver or an enslaving society must act as if people are not people. An enslaving society must destroy the bonds between a would-be slave and their community. It must destroy every sense a person has that they are divine, connected to a lineage of love, beholden to something bigger than their own lifetime. It must destroy every sense a person has that they are powerful enough to direct their own strength, as old and free as the wind. In the Americas, capitalism has never functioned without slavery, or the interest accruing from the feasting of flesh that founded the system that every so-called citizen and economically active resident of the Western Hemisphere is participating in now. The rules carry over. We live in a society where the need for capital supersedes the bonds between people, supersedes a commitment to the environment, and certainly any sense of our own divinity. The targets of an enslaving or capitalist society, our social bonds, our lineage of love, our sense of ourselves as a divine part of nature, are clues to what would most dangerously free us. And so Keriku, which this past summer lost almost every functioning building, may have the greatest wealth in the Western Hemisphere, if not the planet, because countless times the people of this community have met death with a drum, have met enslavement and the possibility of social death with memory and connection across the ocean enslavers used to try to make them forget. In other words, Beryl is the newest, fastest hurricane. But the old hurricane, the worst hurricane, the man-made storm of greed and disconnection is still raging. And Keriku holds a technology with the potential to free us all. The rhythm you play, the dance you do, in the face of the lie that we cannot reach each other across this divide. But wind is our teacher. Audre Lorde, one of the most important poets of the 20th century, is a daughter of Keriku and a theorist of hurricane survival. Her father had survived the Great Windward Islands hurricane in 1898 in Barbados as an infant, in the time before the Weather Service gave storms the names of family members. Some 90 years later, Audre survived Hurricane Hugo in the US colony of St. Croix. Writing by the light of an emergency lantern, she wrote of climate catastrophe using other words. She connected the earthquake in California to Hurricane Hugo, which destroyed 90% of the homes in St. Croix. Y'all want to know what the very first sentence it was that she wrote by that emergency lantern? Yes, you do. Those who do not learn from their history are doomed to repeat their mistakes. Some of us feel dragged. Those who do not learn from their history are doomed to repeat their mistakes. And then Audre Lorde went on to describe her personal and communal experience of the same social disaster playbook that has accompanied every storm since. This was her attempt to make her witness shareable, to tell the others. But unfortunately for all of us, Audre Lorde's account of surviving Hurricane Hugo in St. Croix is devastatingly similar to accounts of US Gulf Coast residents surviving Hurricane Katrina over a decade later, or my Anguillan family members surviving Maria, St. Martin as well, a decade after that. Each was characterized by government's national and colonial prioritization of property and business interests over people, leaving residents in a state of inhumane neglect. Each was followed by a narrative that criminalized bereft people responding to that same abandonment as looters and justified the use of violent force and curfews to constrain the survivors. Each was characterized by the traumatizing military intervention that rounded people up and separated them from their direct support systems. Each was characterized by disaster displacement through which corporations scooped up properties that residents could not afford to rebuild because they were systemically underinsured. And as climate catastrophe gets worse, insurance gets even more unaffordable. These circumstances put already under-resourced governments in the position of having to take out more predatory international loans from financial institutions in the global north to rebuild their infrastructure. And so the same countries that cause the emissions crises, I'm going to say it again. And so the same countries that cause the emissions crises that strengthen the storms profit from the interest that accrues as those storms do more and more damage. In the wake of each storm, neither the most responsible governments nor the global community that watches the desperation and starvation on the news, if it's even covered on the news, which Carriacou barely was, none of that addresses the root causes that turn storms into social nightmares, not natural disasters. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Emmanuel, because of course, Audre Lorde is drawing on this, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, quote. But what she says is those who do not learn from their history are doomed to repeat their mistakes, right? Making it plain. We have not learned from our history of escalating storms. We have repeated the same mistakes again and again. What if, instead of the predictable rhythm of disaster, neglect, militarization, and displacement, when the next disaster comes, it's already here, y'all, we collectively practiced a rhythm informed by the big drum of Carriacou, a ceremony of restoration that centralizes kinship, intergenerational resilience, and a dignified memory of who we are before and after disaster. And some of the examples of the Palestinian artists and seed keepers that TJ Demos spoke about yesterday are absolutely engaged in a kindred practice. Audrey's community of hurricane survivors in St. Croix practiced the mutual aid that restores dignity and rebuilds spirits after traumatic loss. They asked after each other's survival. They shared anything they had when someone else needed it: batteries, information, a tarp. And the mutual aid from other islands in the Caribbean, which was even more crucial because the US government's neglect was also transnational. Because of the US government's neglect, you understand what I'm saying. The people of St. Lucia sent a boatload of ripe yellow bananas to the people of St. Croix, who were hungry and starved for color because Hurricane Hugo had taken every flower, fruit, and vegetable away in its turmoil. Audrey celebrated those ripe bananas and recounted how, as they lined up to get their fruit, community members shared their survival stories. How was it for you? How was it for you? This was part of what inspired Audre Lorde and Gloria Joseph to later create Winds of Change Press, an independent publishing company with the sole purpose of giving the people of St. Croix a space to share their stories of hurricane survival, eventually compiled in the book Hell Under God's Orders, acronym HUGO. The network of mutual aid that responded to Hurricane Hugo went beyond the Caribbean community to include communities of affinity. For example, when after 2 months, running water, electricity, the telephone system, and a functioning hospital still had not been restored in St. Croix, a Black lesbian feminist collective called Ashe was concerned about Audre Lorde, their favorite Black lesbian feminist writer, who they knew was surviving cancer and the hurricane aftermath. They led an initiative among Black lesbians in the United States to send crucial supplies and resources like sleeping bags, tents, lanterns, reading materials, and monetary donations to Lorde's entire community. The organization's Sojourner Sisters distributed supplies locally. By the time Lorde wrote her long thank you letter to that community of support, the organizers in California had experienced a major earthquake in Santa Cruz. After noting the connection between the names Santa Cruz and St. Croix being translations of each other, Audre explained what she believed were the messages in the twin disasters. I do know that hurricanes are a way of cooling down the earth. And I also know we are burning down the rainforests, polluting the atmosphere, and heating up the oceans and the earth, not to speak of tearing jagged holes in her protective ozone layer. The earth is telling us something about our conduct of living, as well as our abuse of this covenant we live upon. This covenant we live upon. Here is our clue. We don't live on a planet. We live on a promise. We are breaking that promise to each other and to all other living, ancestral, and otherwise dynamic aspects of this planet when we consent to the lie of separation. We have to learn to live as a planet. And not simply to reiterate the chorus of "We are the world," though, as I will discuss later, creativity and major financial reparations and aid are needed, but to acknowledge the reality of our interdependence with every aspect of Earth. By the light of that same emergency lantern, Audre Lorde began rewriting her own life's work. She found an only slightly water-damaged copy of her book, Chosen Poems Old and New, and decided to time travel. She went back to the younger person who had written those poems and listened for the wisdom of her earlier self, like she had done with so many of her students. She decided that there was a difference between revision and total reconstruction. And at that point, living in the roofless rubble of her own home, she decided to focus on the poems that didn't need reconstruction, but could benefit from revision. Sometimes her revision included a small change of one word. Sometimes her revision included different line breaks. But most often, Audre Lorde's revisions for what became Undersong, Chosen Poems Old and New, revised, consisted of adding space within a line, allowing a larger breath between words, a subtle change in the rhythm. Some scholars say that in Carriacou today, only 1% of the population actually speaks the Creole referenced in Audre Lorde's poem, Zakitan ke parle lot. That 1% would be found among the elders, who most likely need to be evacuated to mainland Grenada or further in the aftermath of a major hurricane like Beryl. And will they return? The risk of cultural loss is a danger to the survival practices the people of Carriacou have been engaging in since they first survived the trade winds of colonial disaster. It will first be the Carriacou diaspora and their descendants who will remember, to continue to document the big drum ceremonies and seek out the languages behind the songs. And this will happen along with the rebuilding process, as long as predatory business interests, tourism, offshore drilling, don't rush in to fill the gaps in the island still visible on NASA satellite maps? And will those who hear tell the others? The extreme lack of media coverage of Hurricane Beryl's devastating impact on Carriacou suggests that it will be left to us, the artists, to respond and remember. As always, the artists have so much to teach us. I wonder if we could learn from and honor the tradition of the big drum without recolonizing it in our imaginations. The big drum ceremony is specific and irreplaceable. Part of why I insist on drawing attention to it here is that the loss of place, the damage that Carriacou has suffered already last year's hurricane season, is threatening this crucial cultural practice that depends on the ability of specific people to gather. It depends on the access that the drummers, the singers, the family members have to each other and to the ground on which this ceremony was created to reference a connection across the ocean. The specific prerequisites for the big drum ceremony, not to mention the regatta festival and other practices, are under threat in Carriacou. And yet, it is the resilience of the ceremony makers, those who found a vibration that could reconstitute home under the horrific circumstances of kidnapping, violence, displacement, and attempted cultural erasure. It is their resilience that we must honor in this moment, when increasing storms offer not only evidence of the cost of corporate greed on our shared environment, but also opportunities for corporations to displace communities even further by taking over the lands on which they practice. I am saying that the big drum must be able to continue to happen in Carriacou. I am also saying that we should listen to the lesson of the big drum, that home is a vibration, that our existence is accountable to multiple generations, that we must move in the rhythm of memory as we encounter new possibilities. Audre Lorde enacted this crucial tendency in the aftermath of Hurricane Hugo in St. Croix when she chose to go back and fetch her younger self and re-inhabit her own body of work by hurricane lantern in the midst of curfew. My Aunt Una, the retired opera singer, embodied this. When stranded in the flooding of Hurricane Maria on Rendezvous Bay in Anguilla, she picked up my books and started singing the words in them out to the sea. And this is something that I'm seeing over and over again in my conversations with storm survivors. After surviving Super Typhoon Yolanda in the Philippines, Jan Cariel Guillermo has focused on creating structures enabling dancers to travel through their communities, remembering and healing through embodying folkloric memory. While doing community response work in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in North and South Carolina, folklorist and womanist cartographer Michelle Lanier coined the term Afro-Carolina to speak to the intertwined histories and shared destinies of transformative resilience among Black residents of the Carolinas. While supporting her birth community of New Bern, North Carolina, which was impacted by the devastating storm surge of Hurricane Florence, reproductive justice activist Omishade Bernie Scott transformed her experience of a heating planet into Black Girls' Guide to Surviving Menopause, a creative multimedia initiative to transform the conversations about menopause within Black communities and to create an intergenerational platform to diversify the conversations about aging all over the world. After evacuating New Orleans during multiple hurricanes, Black feminist abolitionist artist Kai Lumumba Barrow is creating a flow pattern residency for artists repeatedly displaced and in need of recurring climate refuge. This too is a rhythm, a repetition, a drum call. Over and over again, artists are enacting resilience through creative responses to disaster survival, which means that as we assess loss and damage, it is vital to first invest in the existing cultural resources and traditions that are threatened by climate catastrophe. and also to invest more broadly in the cultural workers of impacted communities who are the leaders and visionaries for how to adapt and move forward in the face of these crises. Culture is not merely decoration. Culture is not a beautiful tangent to the business of survival. Culture is a methodology of survival, a technology for rebuilding and reconnecting, and a focal point of adaptation, of transforming loss. Cultural practice is also a way to tell and to illustrate the truth of our loss. This very writing is a way for me to say, global North nations should be paying reparations to the islands most impacted by the climate crisis, not profiting via loans. Culture is the form that reminds us that we are sacred, divine, and accountable to each other. Culture is how we track a depth of loss that can never be calculated. And what about the cultural forms that you are called to remember? What about the creative methodologies that are emerging in your community and in your own spirit as you grieve and survive? I want you to write about it. I want you to share about it. I think we only have 8 minutes left, but tell the others. So here are some writing prompts to start with. And again, you can find these at the bottom of the text itself on the website, but of course you can also write these down right now. Number 1, what have I survived? Give yourself time to make a list that feels full, if not comprehensive. We may never be able to actually, since it's incalculable, write down all that we have survived. But consider including survivals or events that precede your own lifetime. Consider whether the breadth of your survival includes events and places you had already been displaced from before the disaster. Consider natural and human disasters, including storms, earthquakes, but also wars, land grabs, colonial displacements. 2, what did I learn, change, shift, create during or in the aftermath of my survival? Or since survival is ongoing, what am I learning, changing, shifting, or creating now in the context of what I am surviving? 3, what is my commitment? What am I determined to always help survive? A particular practice, a species, a place, a community? And 4, what is my message to the world? See if you could distill it into one sentence, even if it takes many, many pages of free writing to get there. So those are the 4 prompts. In these 5 minutes, I don't think I'm gonna be able to get your responses to all 4 of those prompts, because I really do want this text of repair to invite us into an ongoing ceremony with ourselves and with our communities, where we ask ourselves these questions. I think sometimes we're so in the midst of survival, right? In the midst of responding to all sorts of disasters, that we don't necessarily have access to a space to think through, what have I already survived? And what did I learn from that survival? What is the commitment and clarity that came from that experience or those multiple experiences of survival? And so what do I have to say? Considering all of that, what do I have to say? So this is an ongoing process. I'm going to stop talking in a second. But I also want to say, I really hope that you do engage these prompts, that you do engage this text and all the other texts that are on the Loss and Damage website, because while the banks are accruing interest based on all of these disasters that they have been complicit in causing, we are not acknowledging the profound wealth, intergenerational wealth of our experience, which actually accrues even more exponentially. And it's important that as we hold institutions accountable and we demand reparations for all of this harm and loss, we also acknowledge our responsibility that we share this survival and we're creating forms to share it intentionally, to adapt intentionally. Okay, so thank you for listening. I think there's some instructions that are going to come to you in these in these last 3 minutes. But thank you so much for joining us. Over 100 of you said, of all the things I could be doing right now, I really want to think about this, and that is important, and that actually helps to heal my heart. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being who you are. And thank you, Phoebe, and thank you, Teo, and thank you for the whole Loss and Damage team for this Ways of Repair ceremony.
Thank you so much, Alexis. Maybe Teo, you could change the slide to the thank you slide. And I'm somewhere behind Alexis right now. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for joining us. And thank you so much, Alexis, for this really beautiful, moving ceremony and reading of your text. It was so beautiful to hear it read, even if I've read it a couple of times. Just it changes everything to hear it. And thank you all of everyone of the attendees, everyone for sharing and for taking part, for sharing your dedications. It was really so touching to read. We really appreciate it. But to close off on a more official, in a more official way, as we have to do with this, with as is our Ways of Repair style. I'll just thank also the Open Society Foundations and the Loss and Damage Collaboration for their generous support in making this symposium possible. And just to remind everyone who hasn't signed up for all the other sessions, you could go ahead to our symposium page on our website to find the sign up links. Alexis will be participating next week in the panel discussion, Transforming Loss, Mourning and Ritual in Times of Climate Crisis, alongside artist in residence Zara Malkani and writer, historian and activist Rebecca Solnit. They will be discussing musical and oral traditions and ceremonies that bring together poetry and protest as forms of remembrance and resistance against environmental devastation. I think it's going to be a really exciting conversation, so I suggest you sign up. And tomorrow we'll be seeing a talk by interdisciplinary scholar, speaker, and author Dr. Farhana Sultana, who will be presenting her text, Decolonizing Climate Knowledge, Repairing Epistemic Injustice and Loss in the Era of Climate Change, which draws on insights from various Global South and Indigenous scholars and argues for the urgent need to decolonize the institutions that govern climate science and policy. You'll find the links on our website to sign up, and I noticed that quite a few people are asking for the chat transcripts. I think we can post those together with the recording and the slides. It should be up on our website in the next 24 hours or so. Thank you again so much for joining. We really appreciated having you here, and we hope to see you again very soon, probably tomorrow or in the next session. See you all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.